Alrighty, quick video on how to actually activate the pineal gland. There's a lot of information out there, but there's actually not nearly as much people who actually develop that connection. And that's because it's a very hard thing to do in our chaotic modern worlds. So, what do we know from the yoga systems, or whatever other spiritual system, maybe Taoism or Qigong, even in the Bible they talk about it. You know, when thine eye becomes one, the body will be filled with light. Another one, when like Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so too must the Son of Man to become immortal. You know, what does these things mean? It's all about these inner channels and activating spiritual centers in the brain. But it's a lot harder to actually do that. You know, there's all sorts of practices online that you can search up to stimulate it, maybe even certain frequencies, but actually making it happen and developing it over time is a very vague and convoluted goal. So one thing that really interests me, and one thing I've thought for a long time, and confirmed by Dr. Joe Dispenza, is that the pineal gland's actually a radio receiver transmitter. So that means that it can give off, light, brain waves. It can also receive that. So it's a transmitter of frequency and a receiver of frequency from your environment, from your surroundings. And actually teaching people to activate the pineal gland can actually be quite irresponsible, because your whole life needs to be have a structure to support the opening of the pineal gland. Just think of this: if it's a sensitive radio receiver transmitter, and you're in an urban environment right now, you're being blasted by 20 radio stations, probably your cell phone in your pocket, probably 5 to 10 closest cell towers, the dirty electricity in your house wiring, 60 hertz. None of these energy sources and radiation sources are in line with the structured energy of our own bodies. So if you actually want to foster and open up these channels to raise energy up these central channels, your environment has to support that first of all, or else you're going to become sick. You're going to become mental. I'm someone who's done some would say extreme breathworks for almost a decade. No, probably more than a decade. More like, I've been doing it a long time, and I often wondered, why does it sometimes work and why does it sometimes not? And in the sense of, sometimes you go and, say for instance for me, I do breath work. You go do it, and sometimes you feel great after, sometimes you don't feel the greatest. And one thing we must acknowledge is that we do not live in perfect environments and situations to foster this type of development in the body. And so I would say the first step of activating your pineal gland is actually changing your life, changing your habits, changing your environment, and what you let yourself be exposed to. Because everything is going to affect your body in subtle ways. So, let's see. some, if you want to start, you know, getting back to the natural energy of your body and what is naturally gifted to us, you got to stop exposing yourself to as much radiation as what is deemed normal. That's the first step. You know, the idea of having a radiating device or devices for some people on the body at all times. If you're trying to make a connection with this sensitive radio transmitter receiver and you're being blasted with, you know, radioactive sources right next to your body that are not the same energy as what's going on in your body, you won't be able to do it. And you start trying to force this energy up through breath work or whatever practice you want, you're gonna cause problems instead of proper, you know, spiritual development. And so you have to kind of acknowledge the body as a temple and a small piece of the divine, because if you treat your body like everyone else does and then try to uplift energy, it ain't gonna work. And like let's say you're someone who kind of you half get it, but at some point you don't understand the electrical systems of the body and how it actually happens, and staying grounded. So you could be disconnected from the earth all day with the shoes you wear, go to a yoga studio on the second floor of a building, and then pretend you're grounding your body out on your plastic yoga mat that's on a laminate flooring, and think you're grounding. Well, I mean, you'll get some benefits, but like really it's best to be connected to the ground, especially when you're doing these spiritual practices or prayer or breath work or yoga. It's best to be connected to the ground, because that's fostering the energy in your bodies and supplying that energy to the kidneys and the water in your body, so that it can be structured in a way that you can start purifying out your channels to eventually let this energy up the spine and activate these higher spiritual centers. Another thing is that, like, the water you drink's very important as well. Water and copper will also have that energy and structure to it that your body needs for your kidneys to properly purify and properly use, because the water in the body is like a medium for energies to course through, you know, through that you know, CFF channel up the spine. And so, and also the type of water that you're putting in your copper, and also it needs to be exposed, needs to be in copper, exposed to air for 12 hours. And some people are kind of a little leery of the metal and toxicity. I haven't found it a problem myself in years of using it, but you could also use a clay pot. It would take longer, but you could also get that energy from a clay pot, and you could possibly even put that on the ground or connected to the ground so that it structures that water quicker. But copper works lovely in my experience, and you know, thousands of years of you know, spiritual yogis also doing that. So that's great. And another thing is, like, the air you breathe is also very important. You know, we have people that have studied the air, and there's heavy metals in our air, which is terrible for these sensitive instruments in the brain. So you should also be detoxing heavy metals, and you know, drinking the water that's open and energetic, so that you can purify these channels, get these unnatural metals out of the body. And you know, sadly, I think there's certain manipulations that we do to the body that kind of embeds these centers with heavy metals that are very hard to get out, and so that's the thing as well. Like you could go your whole life trying to activate this, but if it's been damaged from certain manipulations and heavy metals to the body, like good luck trying to as well foster that connection. So you're gonna have to, if you want the gifts of spirituality and of bringing up this energy, you're gonna start having to realize that your body is a temple and that it's a little piece of the divine. And if you treat it that way, all the stuff's gonna be much easier. But if you walk around, insulated from the ground that has birthed us, getting blasted by, hundreds of different sources of radiation at the same time, and then you're gonna be like, why am I not having mystical experiences? Why don't I feel these spinal channels? It's two different lifestyles, and we've been sold on such a train wreck of society. It took me a long time to find this information and experience with the body, and yogis don't always share it. They kind of lightly touch on the subject here and there, but your sexual habits is actually a big thing to consider if you actually want to fully or if you want to actually open up these channels and experience something. Let's say like a lot of people, you're having sex often, like say every day or every 2 days, the energy is just not going to be there to work with. It's almost like our body has a blueprint and like a natural code, and we have long forgotten that code and these energies that course through us. And there's also the the tantric sex crowd, the non-ejaculatory for either women or men. That's you can do that. It would be somewhat better, but it's still not gonna fully liberate that energy, because when you practice that, you're creating an energy block in your lower energy centers, your genitalia, and that then, so every time you practice that, you're going to create a blockage that you then have to work on to remove. Where if you were, say, even practicing celibacy once in a while, like maybe a month at a time, you'd realize that it liberates the energies in a more fuller way, where it's kind of like trying to have your cake and eat it too, trying to find like a cheat code for the body, but there is none. And I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy yourselves or your body, but just if you 100% want to pursue spirituality and the activation of your pineal gland, you need that energy coursing through your system. And so a lot of figuring out these spiritual cells in the brain is actually gaining control over your lifestyle and your desires and food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the relationships and sexual relationships we have. And once you have, all those factors kind of dialed in, then maybe it's safe to start doing some, intense spiritual practices to get this stuff open. But like I say, you got to be careful, because our environment does not foster a balanced, activated pineal gland. There's a reason why lots of monks are on mountaintops and, hidden in forests and kind of keeping it on the down low. It's because they wouldn't be the same if they were in the middle of an urban environment. They wouldn't be able to develop themselves in the same way. And, one thing I found that is very helpful is protecting your crown from the radiation. So most days, it's pretty hot, so sometimes I switch it up when it's quite hot, but I'm usually wearing a turban with a protective metal layer in it. And this hat has a protective metal layer in it. And so do these glasses. And I cannot fully liberate my energies when I am not protecting my crown from the imbalancing effects of the radiation we're being exposed to. And you get to a certain level of sensitivity that you can feel what's happening. You can feel the pressure created on the crown from these exposures. And so activating the pineal gland is actually a very tricky thing to do safely in our modern world. So I hope that kind of explains a few things, and then once you dial in more and more and more of these things, you can experience more and more, deeper states of spirituality and meditation and connection that's balanced. And you can do more intense breath works and squeeze that energy up. The last thing I'd like to say actually is the base of the spine. There's kind of base of the spine needs to be relaxed when you're doing these breath works or yoga or any spiritual practice, like say exposing yourself to the cold or the heat. Your perineum should always be relaxed. You're supposed to squeeze. You could squeeze up that energy, but you're not using, the anus muscles or the muscles around the perineum. You're using the lower abdominal muscles and the lower back muscles, and squeezing that will put a pressure on the water at the base of the spine, which will then cause it to come up. And you don't even actually need to do that. Your whole body can be completely relaxed, like a lot of yogis do. They'll just sit in meditation for a very long time, and when your body's open and relaxed, the energies can also move that way. So I hope this explains a little bit of what you should do if you're trying to open up, spiritual centers in the brain, and you're bringing your life that way, because it's a very tricky thing to do. So yeah, good luck to you, and happy, spiritual development for all of you.